Yo, what is good, people? Ben from Lover of Tech, and we are back with another video. This time, camera comparison between the iPhone 15 Plus versus the Galaxy S23 Plus. For the record, I've got the normal iPhone 15 and the normal Galaxy S23, both the 6.1 inch versions compared to the bigger ones, which are 6.6 inches and 6.7 inches. The cameras are exactly the same on both phones. It's just a physical size. So the results that you see in this camera comparison with the Plus models will be the same for the normal standard numbered versions. So yeah, we're going to test everything from daylight, low light, front facing, rear facing cameras for photos and videos. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Quick rundown of the camera hardware and specs, starting with the iPhone 15 series. There is a new 48 megapixel main wide sensor, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel selfie. And with the Galaxy S23, you do have a 50 megapixel main wide sensor, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, a 10 megapixel 3x dedicated zoom lens, and a 12 megapixel selfie. There will be chapters in the description below, and the best way to watch this video is at a high resolution and frame rate at 4K 60 with headphones on and also with the larger screen. And also a massive thank you to the guys over at Vodafone UK for supplying both the iPhone 15 series for testing and review. There will be links in the description below for all the latest deals on the iPhone 15 series on Vodafone UK. Without wasting much time, let's get back into the camera comparison. So we are starting off with the selfie camera recording in 4K UHD 60 frames per second video recorder mode on both the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. Just seeing how the image quality is like, stabilization, colors, detail, dynamic range. Quick run. So we now switch over to the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recorder mode on the iPhone 15 Plus versus the Galaxy S23 Plus. Again, just seeing how the image quality is like, dynamic range especially, detail, colors, and video stabilization. Quick run. So we are now still recorded in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recorder mode on the selfie camera on the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus, but this time in the video portrait mode on the Samsung versus the cinematic video mode on the iPhone. And this is what applies the background blur effect on a video. There's a couple of things to consider when it comes to how these phones behave when shooting in this recorder mode. We do have the standard mode, which is the f4.5 simulated on the iPhone 15 Plus versus the blur factor 5 on the Samsung. Now in the Samsung, while you're recording, you do have flexibility to be able to remove the background blur completely and reapply it back to a high level up to 7 on the standard. You can have different blur effects while you're recording, and also pause the video and continue recording. The iPhone doesn't give you any control while you're recording. You can make the changes before you start recording, but most important on the iPhone, you can change the settings after you finish recording from the blur intensity and also the blur position. So that's something to consider when it comes to both. We've now switched over to the rear cameras, shooting in a 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recorder mode on both the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. Again, just seeing how the image quality is like, stabilization, dynamic range, detail, and color. Quick run. In 4K 30, you do have the flexibility to switch between all the lenses at the back without stopping recording. We're now on the ultra wide, and just seeing how the image quality is like. Quick run. Back to the main camera, back to the main. 2x optical mode, the 2x center crop optical mode on both. We're now going to switch to the 3x dedicated zoom lens on the Samsung, whereas on the iPhone it does have to be a digital 3x crop. Let's come back to the main camera for a moment. Another thing to consider on the Samsung, where you can, take pictures while recording. You can do that on the iPhone as well. You can also pause the video on the same clip and then continue recording on the same clip. One advantage you do have on the Samsung as well is you're able to flip to the selfie camera while recording on the same clip. So as you can see, we're still recording 4K 30. This is the same continuous clip. Again, you can pause recording, take pictures, continue recording, and then flip back to the rear cameras where you started. So we've now moved over to the 4K UHD 60 frames per second video recorder mode on the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. We're starting on the main camera. Again, just seeing how the image quality changes, dynamic range, sharpness, details, and also stabilization. Quick run. Here's some things to consider with the limitations and improvements when recording in 4K 60. The iPhone 15 does allow you, while you're recording on the same clip without stopping recording, to switch to the ultra wide and back to the main wide sensor, 2x optical zoom. This is actually lens switching. The Samsung, on the other hand, this is actually cropping in on a main camera. It's not actually switching to the dedicated 3x zoom lens, and you can't switch to the ultra wide while you're recording on the same clip. Now, what you can do is still this: pause the video and continue recording on the same clip and take pictures. You can do that on the iPhone with taking pictures, but you can't pause the video and continue recording. And you can still flip to the selfie camera and still record and continue in 4K 60. As you can see, still the same clip. We're recording in 4K 60 on a selfie camera. You can pause the video, continue recording, take pictures, and then flip back to the rear camera that you started recording on, but you can't switch between the lenses at the rear. I hope that makes sense. We're still in the 4K UHD 60 frames per second video recorder mode, but we switched to the ultra wide angle lens. This is again more for the benefit of the Galaxy S23 Plus, since we had to stop recording, change the lens to the ultra wide to be able to record in 4K 60. And we're just seeing how the image quality and differences are like. Quick run. Again, iPhone allows you to seamlessly switch, and we're going to test the 3x zoom next. So this is on the dedicated 3x zoom lens, still in 4K 60 on the Galaxy S23 Plus versus the dedicated, no, not the dedicated, apologies, the digital crop on a 3x zoom, since the iPhone 15 does not have a dedicated 3x zoom lens. And as you can see, you cannot switch to the main wide sensor, 4x zoom, 10x, 12x. This is all on the 3x zoom lens, but you can't go back to the 1x. Whereas the iPhone, you can switch to the 1x, ultra wide, 1x, 2x, without stopping recording on the same clip. Well done, Apple. Great flexibility and usability in 4K 60. We've now switched over to the 8K 30 frames per second video recorder mode on the Galaxy S23 Plus versus the 4K 30 on the iPhone 15 Plus. Again, this is brilliant from Samsung, allowing you to take the full advantage of the 50 megapixel main sensor to be able to record in 8K 30 frames per second with minimal to no field of view crop, and most importantly, video stabilization, high detail, and also dynamic range being intact. Quick run. Of course, you are able to crop in 2x, 6x. This is all cropping on the main sensor in 8K on the Galaxy S23 Plus. We've now switched over to the action mode on the iPhone 15 Plus versus the super steady mode on the Samsung Galaxy S23 Plus. Again, we're starting with the ultra wide in 2.8K 30 versus 2.5K QHD in 30 frames a second. We're going to do an extreme one and see how the stabilization is like. So still in the action mode versus the super steady mode. Again, we've switched to the 1x lens on both to see how the image stabilization changes. Let's do an extreme run. So we are recording on the rear cameras on the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. Start with the main camera sensor, this time in 4K UHD 30 frames a second. Just seeing how the image quality changes while there is a person in the frame as the subject, as myself. Still in the 4K UHD 30 frames a second video recorder mode on the rear, but we switch to the ultra wide, just seeing how the image quality changes with me in the frame as the subject. We're still recording on the rear cameras in the 4K UHD 60 frames a second video recorder mode on the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. Again, just seeing how the image quality changes with me in the frame as the subject in 4K UHD 60. We've now switched to the ultra wide angle lens on the 4K UHD 60 frames a second video recorder mode on the rear cameras. Again, it's just seeing how the image quality changes with me in the frame as the subject. So we've now switched over to the 8K video recorder mode on the rear camera on the Galaxy S23 Plus, comparing it to the iPhone 15 Plus, just to see how the image quality is like in the super high resolution mode. So we're now recording in the video portrait mode versus the cinematic mode on the iPhone 15 Plus versus the Galaxy S23 Plus. This is in the 4K UHD 30 frames a second recorder mode and quality with the background blur on the rear cameras with me in the frame as the subject. We're starting on the main 1x lens and see how it goes. So we are in the 4K UHD 30 frames a second video recorder mode. Low light on the iPhone 15 Plus versus the Galaxy S23 Plus. And we're just seeing how the low light performance is like. Okay. See the lens flaring. You can see a lot more light orbs on the 15 Plus. And we're going to switch to the ultra wide. Back to the main. Let's do slow walk in the 2X. These are obviously cropping on the main sensor. And we'll do 3X. And back to the main. We are now recording in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recording mode on the selfie camera on both the iPhone 15 Plus and the Galaxy S23 Plus. Again, just seeing how the image quality and the performance is like in low light. Now that we've seen the videos, let's move over to the pictures. And we're going to start with the daytime images with the landscape images with the iPhone 15 and the Galaxy S23. We're going to start with the ultra wide, and these are in their respective 12 megapixel modes. And I would definitely say that the Samsung goes for a more neutral, I'll say cooler color tone compared to the iPhone, you know, which is definitely a lot warmer. Both have their own look, slightly more saturated in the sky in the Samsung and more contrasty on the iPhone. I do like the image on the Samsung. Let's move over to the main wide sensor. And here, of course, the new iPhone shooting default mode is 24 megapixels in JPEG with no shutter or capture speed delay, which is brilliant. And the detail's really there. Things really stay consistent when you move over, but definitely I think there's more detail in the iPhone, so I do prefer that image. Move over to the 2X zoom mode on both. Definitely the Samsung does better. Here's why. If you look at the fence where you can see the Leisure Leagues poster here, there's a lot of moire and color shifting in there, whereas the Samsung doesn't really exhibit that, and it does look to process a much cleaner image. So Samsung does a better job here, which is great to see. And now the lack of a dedicated zoom lens really starts to hurt iPhone 15, because at the 3X, Samsung really kicks in. You can see that it does a bigger digital crop because it doesn't have a dedicated zoom lens, and the image really just falls apart. And on top of that, the iPhone only tops out at 10X. And if you can see the difference, you can't make out the image on the iPhone 15 at all compared to the Galaxy S23. And again, you can go up to 20X as well as 30X on the Samsung. And yeah, when it comes to the extended zoom, this is where having that dedicated 3X zoom lens really wins it out on the Samsung. Next one is the high resolution JPEG shooter mode. And in this particular situation, the processing time on the Samsung takes a little longer than an iPhone. And the iPhone seems to be a bit more consistent in the high resolution mode. Here, I took it twice in this situation. The Samsung didn't really do much of a great job, whereas the iPhone really did in this particular situation. Here's a direct shot against the sun, starting with the main 1X lens. And this is more to test how the glaring would be on both phones and how they just handle HDR in such a harsh situation. And yeah, both actually do a very good job. So it's really just down to personal preference, what you prefer, whether you want the cooler image or the more warmer image of the iPhone. Yeah, and ultra wide is pretty much consistent. I would say there's better HDR on the shadows in the ultra wide on the Samsung, so that probably wins it out. And again, in this particular situation, the 48 megapixel versus the 50 megapixel mode on the iPhone to the Samsung does a lot better. It's just not as consistent. You don't know where the HDR is going to kick in or not, whereas the iPhone is more consistent in the high resolution mode. So I kind of prefer it when it comes to the high resolution. Now, next is a close-up shot of the flower. Both these phones lack a macro mode, but what you do see here is a test of the minimum focusing. I love the new 48 megapixel sensor on this 15 compared to the Pro. The minimum focusing distance is a lot better, so you can get a lot closer. This is really more just down to like an artistic look and preference. The Samsung does allow you to get closer, but there is more of an intense natural blur. The colors are much more pleasing, so I kind of prefer it when it comes to this mode. And then this is also with the high resolution 48 megapixel versus the 50 megapixel. Pretty much stays consistent, which is great to see. Time for some selfies. And in this particular situation, both when it comes to skin tones are not that great, but I do prefer the iPhone a bit more because of the realistic colors of my jacket in the scene. It does make my skin a bit too dark compared to the Samsung, but I like the overall colors and the look of the image. We go to portrait mode. It's very consistent when it comes to the same colors edge detection is great on both. I think I would say edge detection is slightly better on the Samsung. But I will say I like the more realistic look of the background blur of the iPhone. This is quite consistent when it comes to portrait mode. So this is the last set of daylight shots with the rear camera with me in the frame as the subject, starting with the main 1x lens. And you do get a slightly wider field of view on the Samsung compared to the 26mm lens on a 48 megapixel sensor on the iPhone. But the iPhone does produce better overall colors in the scene. Again, skin tones are a little bit too dark on my preferred side, but overall I like the colors in the image on the iPhone better than the Samsung in this situation. The ultra wide, I would say I prefer the Samsung in this particular situation. It does a much better job, but the colors on the iPhone are a lot better in my opinion. Now, the 2x mode is interesting because it's pretty much pound for pound. I'll probably lean in this particular situation more to the iPhone. But when we move over to the 3x zoom, again, the iPhone does hold better colors, but in terms of the actual clarity and detail, Samsung is a lot better because it does have a dedicated 3x zoom lens. So it's really just down to that. When we move over to the high resolution mode, again, the HDR didn't really kick in that well on the Samsung. And this is what I mean about the high resolution 50 megapixel mode is quite inconsistent when the HDR will kick in and the processing, where the iPhone is a lot more consistent in that, and I like the image. Portrait mode on the main 1x lens, both do a great job. I really do like the iPhone's more realistic look of the blur simulation of the background, but both do an excellent job when it comes to the overall edge detection. Even with the gaps in my arms, they both do really well in that retrospect. In the 2x mode, this is what we have here, which is quite consistent. I love the compression. I will say this is where Samsung really does well. Again, having a dedicated 3x zoom lens for portrait mode is so clutch. This is something that is missing on the iPhone 15 because it does not have a dedicated 3x zoom lens. Let's turn the lights down and get into some low light images. And these first set of low light shots with the landscape images are without night mode active. People ask me, why do I do this? Night mode takes time. Without night mode active, your shots are faster. So it's always good to see which one produces the best images without night mode active for faster capture in low light. And when it comes to the ultra wide, Samsung is a lot better in this particular situation without night mode. You can clearly see it's brighter, although both lack detail and are a bit muddy. Samsung is a lot better in this situation. On the 1x zoom lens, I will say that overall I probably prefer the iPhone more because there's just weird magenta light shift with Samsung at low light, even without night mode, around lights that I don't necessarily really like. I do like the overall image when it comes to the colors, but I will say that maybe it's a toss-up. It's 50-50. Let me know in the comment section below which one you prefer. 2x mode, definitely Samsung does a lot better. The iPhone image is so much noisier. Samsung does a lot better job. There is slightly more detail in the foliage and the grass, but I do prefer the Samsung. In the 3x mode, again, Samsung still holds it compared to what we're seeing here on the iPhone. And of course, in the 10x mode, even without night mode active, both are quite, tough in this situation without night mode, but I do prefer the image and the look of the Samsung. And with the Samsung, of course, you've got the 20x mode as well as the 30x mode that you've got the option for compared to the 10x that tops up. And then when we run it all again, night mode is now active on all the sequences that we just saw. And you can see this really helps the iPhone a lot more than anything. I think it just overpowers the Samsung a bit too much because it was already doing such a good job without it in a weird way. And the main wide sensor is still the same, right? Very consistent across the board. Both do a great job, but the color shifting around the lights on the Samsung is something I don't like, which is better handled on the iPhone. And again, night mode in the 2x mode, which is something that is still yet again consistent as before. And you do have the 3x mode, which again with the iPhone is just blurry. And I had this on the tripod. And if we look at the night mode at 10x, yeah, the iPhone is non-existent. Barely existent on the Samsung. There's a lot of color fringing around, so it's not that great, but it's still the better out of the two. Now, this particular one is interesting. This is pretty much pitch black. Honestly, you cannot see anything in this particular situation on a wide sensor. But then the next shot, boom, it's almost like night vision. This is on the tripod with night mode on a maximum 30-second exposure time on both. Yes, you do see some light streaks on the Samsung, but again, you can't account for the cars and stuff that are coming around. But both do an excellent job. There's no winner here as such. It's a draw in my opinion. Both do great to be able to allow you to see in the dark. I'll probably say maybe the Samsung allows you to see the stars in the sky a little bit better. But overall, man, both do an excellent job in this situation. Time for some low light selfies. And this is some interesting development as we go through the sequence. Again, without night mode active, just taking a normal selfie. Here, Samsung does a lot better. You can just clearly see it. You do get a slightly wider field of view on the iPhone, but the image from the Samsung is better. Now, night mode doesn't really help both all that well because, again, keeping a tripod steady in your hand when you're doing night mode is quite difficult. But again, the image does brighten up. I do like the overall colors on the skin from the Samsung, but colors on the scene from the iPhone is nice. So portrait mode. So this is where it's interesting. Again, portrait mode works on both without night mode. I would say Samsung does a lot better job, much better clarity, great edge detection. But with the iPhone, you cannot use portrait mode and night mode together. It is quite difficult unless you have a tripod standing still, but holding it, it is a bit blurry on the Samsung, but you do have the ability to use portrait mode and night mode together. Now, here's the front screen flash without night mode, and of course, without portrait mode. And this is how you can shoot low light portrait mode with the iPhone with flash. Again, it's quite muddy. I would say overall in this particular situation, Samsung is just a more consistent and better experience for selfies in low light, including portrait mode and night mode and flash. Okay, last set of low light images with the rear camera with me in the frame as the subject. And we're gonna start with the main 1x wide lens. And you do get a slightly wider field of view on the Samsung, of course, and it does produce a better image. The iPhone is very soft and muddy in this particular situation. And same goes for the ultra wide. The ultra wide is just non-existent on the iPhone. Struggles on both, but the Samsung is just a lot better when it comes to the ultra wide without night mode active. 2x mode as well, same thing. Samsung just processes a much better overall image. And yes, it does struggle with the 3x because it does have a dedicated 3x zoom, and it did switch to it in this particular situation. The iPhone is brighter, but again, both are not really good in this situation. And let's activate night mode. So night mode active, again, this is why I do it without night mode. You can see that standing still for as long as you can, even with the main wide sensor on the iPhone, it's just blurry. It's just blurry. And the Samsung just does a lot better when it comes to this particular situation. And yes, when we move over to the ultra wide, you can see that both trade blows pound for pound. But again, I still prefer Samsung. I would say maybe the highlight retention on the skin is better on an iPhone, but I do prefer the Samsung overall. 2x mode, again, Samsung still produces a much better image, whereas the iPhone does retain the highlights on the skin a lot better. And of course, in a 3x mode as well, the dedicated zoom lens does a lot better for the Samsung, which is great to see. And now, portrait mode. Again, portrait mode works in just the 1x mode. You can't even use night mode on portrait mode. So here is where you're gonna see, in this particular situation, it's Samsung all the way, and iPhone really falls behind when it comes to the iPhone 15, which is quite disappointing, and I wasn't really expecting that. So again, 2x, you can use it without night mode. The 2x on the iPhone does not work at all. 3x as well works in the without night mode active in low light. Again, there's no 3x mode because there's no 3x dedicated sensor on the iPhone 15. And then when night mode is active, which you can't use night mode at all in portrait mode on the rear cameras on the iPhone, Samsung just walks away with it. In the 1x, in the 2x, and even in the 3x. I would say the 3x even looks better than the 2x. So definitely avoid using the 2x for portrait mode on a Samsung. Go straight to the 3x or use the 1x with night mode and portrait mode. It's just a lot better. The only way you're going to shoot low light portrait images with the rear camera on the iPhone is with the flash, and it prompts you to use the flash. Now the iPhone does have a very powerful flash in the 1x mode. It works in portrait mode. It's a bit overbearing, so the Samsung looks a lot more natural, even though the flash is weaker. And then when we go to the 2x mode, you can see that this is still the case on both. But the iPhone does have a cleaner image, but it is more muddy and less detailed. Time to wrap this camera comparison up with the conclusion of the video performance. Let's start with the Selfie. Now, both of these phones trade blows pound for pound when it comes to video recording mode, up to 4K 60, and also video portrait mode on a Selfie camera up to 4K 30. What's still so frustrating about iPhones is, for as long as I've been doing camera comparisons and testing iPhone cameras, the first iPhone that could do 4K 60 on a Selfie camera was the iPhone 11 Pro, all the way back in 2019. And when you're recording in 4K 60 on a Selfie on an iPhone, dynamic range just goes out the window. There's just blown out highlights everywhere in the sky and on the skins. And this goes away when you're in 4K 30. This is not an issue on Samsung phones. So when you're in 4K 30, the image quality for video on iPhone is just brilliant. And Samsung is not that far behind. But the Selfie, when it comes to video, is a lot more consistent, especially with the loss of dynamic range on the Selfie. But overall, both are really good. And when it comes to the video performance of the Selfie, they trade blows very well. Now for the rear cameras, when it comes to the video performance, and props to Apple for improving the usability of recording in 4K 60 frames a second. You can record and switch between all the lenses at the back, between the wide and the ultra wide, without having to stop recording and switch into the other lens and continuing again. This is such a limitation that's been there, and I'm glad it's gone. Samsung still has this issue in 4K 60, and I hope when it comes to the Galaxy S24 series, they fix this to make it as usable as they do in 4K 30, because in 4K 30, Samsung has the most flexible camera system for video that you can find. You can switch between all the lenses at the back, pause recording on the same clip, continue recording on the same clip, flip to the Selfie, then come back to the rear cameras. That level of flexibility is brilliant. And this is something you get in 4K 30, and I hope they fix in 4K 60. Now, when it comes to the image quality, Samsung actually allows you to record in 8K video, and it's usable and it looks good. So no complaints. The fact that they've been able to pull this off, it's brilliant, and really allows you to take full advantage of that main 50 megapixel wide sensor. The actual image quality of video though, I will give it to Apple. They do a fantastic job when it comes to video image quality. And overall, I will say they're still pretty much very good. And Samsung's not that far behind, but Apple does a great job when it comes to overall video image quality. Now that is it with this ultimate camera comparison of the iPhone 15 Plus, iPhone 15 versus the Samsung Galaxy S23, S23 Plus. If you made it this far, make sure you put a fist bump emoji in the comments so I know that you're a real one. But that's it for me, Ben from Lover of Tech. If you enjoy videos like this, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you're part of Team TLS, the Tech Lover Squad, so you don't miss any future videos on the channel. I hope you're all safe during this time. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.